Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, as today we're playing as Apollyon. So this is the second Apollyon daily in a row, and I'm always glad when that happens because I feel like it's a very good opportunity to contrast some differences that happen between the runs. So even though we're playing the same character, we have the same active item, a lot of the run can be quite different, and especially a strategy with how we approach it. And I always think it's a very interesting way to kind of compare the two and just to see maybe what actions or maybe certain items or maybe what happens in the round that influences those decisions. So in this particular case, we're still sticking with the void. We have pretty much the same strategy. Obviously, we're looking to replace it, but in this particular case, or at least in this particular daily, unlike yesterday, we're not really looking for something like the blank card or the shovel. We don't want to really replace our void with either of those two items because it's not really going to do that much for us. We can just suck the blank card up, of course. And in the case of the shovel, we don't even need it because we're going to the cathedral. So it just, I would say, alleviates us of one choice that can happen. But of course, there are still some very tough decisions. And in this particular case, the very first treasure room had Midas's Touch. And Midas's Touch, I think, is a very interesting item because it can be really, really good if you can kind of get it working. If you find a way to get some invisibility, if you find a way to get enough money, it can be a very deadly and a very potent item. And as soon as you enter a room, you just walk into a bunch of enemies. Not only do you damage them and kill them in most cases, but you also get some money in return. So it's just, as far as daily runs go, it's a very effective and a very potent item that basically pays for itself. But in a lot of the other cases, if you don't have a way to actually trigger the invisibility, Midas's Touch can be quite useless and it just doesn't do anything. And maybe in the most extreme case scenario, it only reduces the damage the contact damage that you take, and just maybe gives you a little bit more points in return. So it's essentially, I would say, functions like a damage penalty reducer in some sense, because every time you get hit now you get money. So that kind of balances out a little bit in some regard. But obviously it's never going to be worth to get hit just to get a few pennies. Like the points don't really match up there. But you know, it does make it a little bit easier. And in that particular instance, Midas's Touch is just not a very good item, and I wouldn't pick it up because there's no reason to. So how can we know whether a certain item will actually be effective throughout the run and whether it won't be? Well, in this particular case, of course, you can't really know, because it's onto the first floor. You never really can decide if you're gonna get anything else in return. Maybe you get an Ivy bag later on, maybe you don't, but in this particular case, I feel like maybe picking up Midas's Touch would have been a better idea. So let me explain why. I didn't have much information to work with, but one information I did have is that there was a blood bank on the first floor, and of course that allowed us to trade our health away, and eventually we got to 5 cents. So what that happens, or what it means, I would say, is not only does it increase our chances of actually getting the Ivy bag, because not only, of course, can we just play the blood bank on the first floor, but also it decreases our chance of getting a blood bank on every subsequent floor, because now we have 5 cents going to the second floor, and that means that there's a higher chance of an arcade spawning. And of course, as soon as that happens, and when you have the Ivy bag, then you can use the Ivy bag not only to damage yourself, to damage boost, get into enemies, just get a lot more money that way, but it just works, I would say, very well in tandem, especially because we know we're going to the cathedral. There's also the Polaroid at a certain point waiting for us, and when we pick that up, we essentially will have this invisibility frames that we can utilize, and of course get the shield. And once you get that going, and of course when you pick up the Polaroid, you can do boss rush very efficiently, because you can just kind of keep walking into enemies. And especially with the Ivy bag, because when you kill the bosses, they give you more red health, you can kind of keep that shield triggered, and it does allow you to do not only a lot of damage, but also accrue a lot of points. So from that point in perspective, I think I should have picked up Midas's Touch, and then if there was an Ivy bag at a certain point, I could have just picked that up and just maybe went from there. But I decided against it. I decided to suck it up, and I think the main reason for that is I just wanted to stick with the void, honestly. I wasn't really thinking in such advance. Of course, this is like retrospect at this point, but I was like, you know, sure, Midas's Touch might be useful, but the odds are it's not really gonna do anything for me, because I want to stick with the void. I want to suck up certain passive items, and if there's gonna be an angel room chance, or at least at a certain point if an angel room will come, I would much rather have the void than any of the other items, because it allows me to essentially suck up 2 or maybe even in some cases 3, 4 or even 5 items and get some random stat upgrades in return. So in that particular instance, I decided to stick with the void, just see where it would take me, and it was actually the right choice, even though it was for the wrong reasons, if that makes any sense. So at a certain point we got a D1, and of course I decided to use that, suck it up in the void, and that allows you not only to break the game, but also I would say kind of gives you a little bit of a boost. You essentially have an infinite amount of every card or every consumable that you can basically muster. For example, in this case, the sun card, I can just drop the sun card on the ground, I can duplicate it, use one to have mapping, and then keep the other one for the next war and do basically the same principle again. And in this instance, the D1 actually works pretty well on a 6-room charge, because it's pretty much guaranteed that I'll be able to use it multiple times, or at least one time per floor, and it will allow me to kind of keep going. And definitely the breaking point here was picking up car battery, which not only does it make it trigger once, but it makes it trigger twice. And of course, when you have one battery and you duplicate another battery, you're gonna get 2 batteries in return. So you're trading 1 battery for 2 batteries, and that leads to an infinite combo. So when you combine all of those things together, you can kind of see where things are going in this direction. It's definitely a very potent breaking combo, which we wouldn't really be able to achieve if you only had the Ivy bag. So if you kind of look at the situation here, and think, what would the Ivy bag do for us instead of the Void with the D1? And of course, the Ivy bag would allow us still to walk into enemies, be incredibly potent. We would be able to do boss rush most likely, and of course just deal damage and just get a lot of points that way, which is definitely good because we're kind of low on money, and especially as we're going forward through these floors, which actually have a lot of very weak enemies, we could just walk into them, and I think our clear speed would be overall much faster, which would of course also lead to a higher exploration bonus. But of course, with the Void and the D1, we still have that potential that when we get to a floor when we can actually afford to stop and just take some time, we'll be able to pretty much guarantee to break the game and get a lot of Shrek that way, which is not something we can really do with the Ivy bag. So if you kind of look at the points there, I think this is still a little bit better, just because of how many points you can actually accrue just by breaking the Shrek cap and getting a lot of consumables. It's not a very fair aspect in some regard, because I think the Ivy bag is definitely, in this case, the smarter and the wiser and also a much more methodical play, but it is what it is, right? If you find a way to break the game, and this is maybe one way to do it, and regardless of how it happens, obviously I just have to take the advantage, and this is exactly what I try to do in this case. So as we were going through this, of course, as I mentioned, I didn't get to boss rush. We did get to hush. We got quite a lot of, I would say, good items at this point. We have magic mush. We have what's it called? The cloak that gives you damage and 3 black hearts. It's at the top of my head, but I can't remember it. And of course, Polyphemus, the soul. And the soul actually is a bit of a double-edged sword, because what ends up happening when you're fighting Harsh, as soon as he shoots his continuum shots, you want to be right under him. But the problem with the soul is that it bounces the tears off in random directions, and then there's really no way to dodge. There's no way to predict where the tears are coming from, and you're just gonna end up getting hit at a certain point. Especially if you're not really strong, like I'm not in this case. Sure, 31 damage might seem like a lot at 13 tier delay, and that's good for regular rooms, but against Harsh, because of his damage scaling, it's usually just better to deal more consistent damage as opposed to dealing more damage, if that makes any sense. So at this point, I was just going through. Of course, I did get hit a few times, but I wasn't too worried, because I knew I was still going to the Void. There were going to be a lot of opportunities to break there, but even more importantly, there's a shop here which has a battery charge, and there's also a few golden bombs just outside of that room. So what that will allow me to do is go in the shop, duplicate them until I have just a full room of battery charges, and then I can just keep walking back and forward to duplicate the golden bombs. And I would have done this until I actually reached the cap to a certain degree, but I decided against it. Like I duplicated maybe like 50 times in total, which is still a lot, obviously. But because there was Curse of the Maze, it kind of kept teleporting me up and down. That was a bit annoying. So in essence, I went through the Void. I went there. I duplicated a bunch of golden bombs. You can see me breaking the game here, essentially, because I said every time we use a battery, we spawn 2. That leads to an infinite combo. We can just kind of keep repeating that. And eventually we finished the run, and of course rank in a very good place, and I think I was ranked 2nd on the Gridbot leaderboard, so that's once you take the cheaters out. So we're in a very good place, and you know, maybe we're looking at the top 3 finish. I'm not really looking too forward to it, because I don't think it's gonna happen, just because there, of course, we miss boss rush, so that's like 4,000 easy points that someone can get if they keep with this combo, and I do imagine there will be still more players which will actually find a way to just get to this point, find the D1, of course, and then maybe use that to break the game just the same way I did, but because they would be maybe a little bit faster or a little bit better, they'll also be able to get to boss rush and maybe get a forget me now or something like that, and that will allow them just to get maybe a few more points on top of me. But I definitely think we're looking at like a top 5 finish for this day. It's definitely one of those dailies which was very difficult, and we just found, I would say, a very opportunistic way to break it, even though we maybe made the right choice at the start. Not the wrong choice at the start, which actually led to be the right decision in the end. That's what I was trying to say. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.